Dawn breaks in a nameless hue, bluer than the sky and as clear as glass. The shallow waters stretch out like an unfinished map, shifting from deep blue to turquoise, then near transparent. In one corner of that map, a massive ship, the size of a small city, gleams brilliantly, ferrying tourists into a resort ablaze with lights, the very image most people picture when they hear the country's name. A few hours boat ride away, a small house with a rust-stained tin roof sits quietly on the water. No boats have stopped by this week. Both belong to the same country. This is the Bahamas. Not a single island, but 700. That glow is just one snapshot. Beyond it lie 699 more, each with its own color, unforgettable the moment you set foot on it. Looking down from the sky, the Bahamas does not look like a country. It resembles a painter's palette spilled across the Atlantic. This is a place where the sea remains so shallow that sunlight kisses the white sand on the ocean floor and reflects back a shade of turquoise so vivid that no camera filter can truly capture its soul. This vast expanse of sunlit water has a name. It is the Bahama Banks. It is a shimmering plateau of water that stitches hundreds of isolated islands together with a carpet of light shifting constantly with every change in depth. But follow that color toward Long Island, and the world suddenly drops away into a void of ink. This is Dean's Blue Hole, a vertical abyss plunging into the earth. Divers who venture there say that just a few dozen meters down, the roar of the world vanishes. The sun above becomes nothing more than a small silver coin lost in a dark sky. To a local diver who grew up with the salt in his blood, these colors were never just a view. They were a language and a map for survival. Pale blue meant the safety of the shallows. Dark blue meant the weight of the deep. A sudden shadow in the clarity could mean a reef teeming with life, or a hole with no bottom at all. Further south, the Andros Barrier Reef stands like a silent living fortress beneath the surface. It is the third largest reef system on Earth, where silver clouds of fish pulse through coral cathedrals that took thousands of years to grow into their current majesty. This water is beautiful and treacherous and endless. It has dictated the fate of every Bahamian. It decided where a home could be built and where a boat could dare to pass. It is the reason why a nation of 700 islands only has people on about 30 of them. The rest of the Bahamas remains a wilderness of salt and silence. This is not because it is unwanted. No matter how inviting the water looks, it is still a distance that must be earned. It is the beautiful barrier where the postcard ends and real life begins. 3 centuries before the Bahamas became a mandatory stop for luxury cruise ships, Nassau existed as something far more dangerous. It was a lawless port city where pirate captains dictated their own rules and lived by their own codes. Historians call that brief and chaotic era the Pirate Republic. There was no central government and no tax collector. There were only shadows of masts crowded into the harbor as crews waited for the next chance to slip out into the blue. About 200 years later, when the United States banned alcohol, that same maze of shallow water became a sanctuary for the bold. Rum was loaded onto small, nimble boats that navigated secret channels missing from every official map. They moved like ghosts through the reefs to land quietly on the Florida coast under the absolute cover of night. A local guide leading walking tours through the old town of Nassau passes these same alleyways every morning. For him, history is not a collection of dates kept in a dusty book. It is a physical presence felt underfoot in the worn stones once tread by pirates and in the silhouette of the old fort guarding the harbor. He knows that the Pirate Republic is still spoken of with a sense of pride rather than shame. In 1973, the Bahamas finally gained full independence from Britain to end more than 2 centuries of colonial rule. Yet a single thread connects every chapter of this story, from piracy to rum running to sovereignty. Bahamians learned how to transform their isolation into a source of power. It became an enduring instinct that still shapes how people here perceive the vast ocean around them. This same spirit defines daily life today, especially for the people whom tourists almost never meet. In the vibrant city of Nassau, the transition between work shifts usually begins while the golden tropical sun is still hanging high in the sky. You can observe the hotel staff stepping out through quiet service doors where they quickly trade their crisp and pressed uniforms for plain cotton t-shirts before disappearing into the humid flow of the afternoon streets. Most of these workers do not live anywhere near the glittering luxury resorts they just departed. Instead, they journey home to neighborhoods known locally as Over the Hill, which sit only a few miles from the neon coastline, but represent an entirely different world of reality. Nearly 3/4 of the total population of this nation resides on New Providence, which is the bustling island where the capital sits. Everyone else is scattered across dozens of much smaller islands that Bahamians simply and affectionately call the Family Islands. On Spanish Wells, which is a tiny and tight-knit community nestled off the northern tip of Eleuthera, life moves at a noticeably slower and more intentional pace. Pastel-colored houses sit close together along the narrow lanes where most residents are related to each other through deep lineages that stretch back several generations. In fact, the task of figuring out exactly how everyone is connected can easily occupy an entire afternoon of casual porch conversation. a woman who grew up on a remote family island and now works in the high-pressure hospitality industry of Nassau, says that every single visit back home feels like stepping into a completely different version of the Bahamas. It is a place that is slower and quieter, but somehow feels much more connected to the human soul. These two distinct rhythms, the constant hustle of Nassau and the profound stillness of the family islands, are not actually opposites. They are more like two essential halves of the same national identity. Most Bahamians, no matter where they happen to lay their heads at night, carry both of these rhythms inside their hearts at the same time. If the hustle of Nassau and the stillness of the family islands are the two halves of the Bahamian soul, then there must be a place where those two worlds actually touch. To find that connection, you must look to the water's edge long before the first light of dawn even begins to touch the horizon. It is here, at Potter's Cay Dock, nestled directly beneath the massive concrete bridge that connects the urban energy of Nassau to the luxury of Paradise Island, that the country's heartbeat is most visible. In the cool blue darkness of the early morning, sturdy and weathered boats begin the rhythmic and heavy process of loading cargo for the long journeys ahead. These vessels are known as mailboats, and they serve as a vital and ancient lifeline that has functioned in the exact same way for many generations of islanders. They carry the essential materials of survival, from heavy sacks of rice and crates of fresh local produce to handwritten mail, and sometimes even a massive new refrigerator destined for remote islands that possess no bridges and no highways. In some of the most isolated corners of this vast archipelago, this single scheduled boat arriving just once a week is the only thread connecting a family to the modern world beyond their shores. The seasoned captain who navigates one of these specific routes has been making the same turquoise crossing for nearly 20 years. To a man like him, the schedule is far more than just a professional obligation or a way to earn a living. It is the single most important bridge that keeps a small, isolated community from drifting away from the rest of the country. On another distant island, a dedicated teacher manages every single grade out of one small wooden classroom because the entire student population of the island barely fills a single room. In the early mornings, instead of waiting for a yellow school bus, a few children arrive at the dock by small boats that are quietly rowed to shore by a parent. No mechanical clock or digital screen truly governs the way of life in these remote reaches of the Bahamas. Instead, the rising tide and the unpredictable boat schedule dictate the natural and slow flow of each day. A community meeting might be pushed back for several hours or even a full day, not because someone was careless or late, but simply because the water was not calm enough for safe travel. In the capital of Nassau, people who are unfamiliar with this ancient rhythm often complain about the frustrations of modern traffic and delays. But only a few hours away by boat, the very act of going to work can mean paddling across an open channel, and waiting on a delivery can mean watching the empty horizon for an entire week. This is the enduring reality of the same country existing through two completely different ways of measuring the passage of time. The different ways that Bahamians measure time are mirrored perfectly by the different ways they sustain their lives. Along the pristine stretches of Cable Beach and the manicured landscapes of Paradise Island, rows of infinity pools run one after another down the coastline like mirrors reflecting the endless sky. Here, a sea of sun-drenched lounge chairs remains occupied from the first light of morning until the stars emerge at night. This is the economic face of the Bahamas that the world knows best. Tourism makes up nearly half of the entire national economy, and almost all of those millions of jobs are concentrated within the bustling hubs of Nassau and Freeport. But if you venture just a few blocks away from the shadow of the towering resorts, you will find a second economy running in total silence. Inside monolithic glass buildings with no flashy signage or neon lights, a global financial engine operates almost invisibly to anyone on vacation. For many decades, the Bahamas has served as a premier international offshore banking center that handles vast sums of money for clients who have never once set foot on these islands. A young finance professional working in a quiet office in downtown Nassau sums up the surreal nature of her daily job in one simple line by saying that she works for people she has never met in a place they have never been. Near the bustling harbor, something entirely different and far more ancient is happening. Under the shade of the straw market, rows of women sit with practiced grace as they weave long strips of dried palm leaf into intricate baskets and wide-brimmed hats and colorful souvenirs. This is a craft passed down through countless generations of mothers and daughters. It provides a modest but steady income for hundreds of families who rely on the rhythmic motion of their hands rather than the flow of digital currency. Those three distinct economies of tourism and offshore finance and the traditional straw market all sit almost entirely on just two islands. The Family Islands, which comprise most of the country's actual landmass, must depend instead on the uncertainty of fishing and small-scale trade and the money sent home by relatives working in the heat of Nassau. This stark contrast is the very root of the economic imbalance that this film explored at its opening. It is a nation united under the same flag, but where the reach of opportunity is not divided in the same way at all. While the flow of wealth and opportunity may be divided by the deep channels between these islands, there remains a much more powerful rhythm that binds every Bahamian into a single family. This pulse does not care about the size of a bank account or which remote island a person calls home, because it belongs to the collective soul of the entire nation. There is one specific morning each year when Bay Street in the heart of downtown Nassau awakens long before the sun even dares to touch the horizon. On this sacred day, the people do not gather for the sake of work or to satisfy the demands of the tourism industry. They come together for a much older and deeper purpose. They come together to dance. This explosion of life is known as Junkanoo. It is a thunderous street parade defined by the primal heartbeat of goatskin drums and the rhythmic clatter of cowbells and the sight of towering costumes built from thousands of layers of delicate crepe paper and fabric. These vibrant creations are so intricate and colorful that it is nearly impossible to believe they were entirely handmade inside cramped backyard workshops and hidden neighborhood shacks. Historians tell us that this celebration began with a history far heavier than its festive surface suggests. During the era of slavery, the enslaved Africans in the Bahamas were granted only a handful of precious days off each year, which typically occurred around the Christmas season. Many believe that Junkanoo grew out of those rare and fleeting moments of stolen freedom, where the soul could finally express the joy and the pain that the body was forced to hide. A dedicated Junkanoo costume maker will spend almost the entire year inside his small and airless workshop. He spends months painstakingly gluing layer after layer of vibrant paper and carefully bending bamboo frames into impossible shapes, all to finish a masterpiece that will be worn for only a single morning. To him, not a second of that time is ever wasted. It is his way of remembering once a year that freedom was once something that had to be won through struggle and spirit rather than simply being handed over. Not far from the vibrant parade route in Nassau or tucked away on a quiet family island, a small stone church fills with the sound of soaring singing every Sunday morning. The traditions of the Baptist and Anglican faiths run deep into the very bedrock of Bahamian life. This is especially true on the smaller islands, where the church remains the absolute center of the community and the primary keeper of local history. The frantic thunder of Junkanoo drums and the solemn beauty of church hymns might seem to belong to two completely different worlds. But in the heart of a Bahamian, they are really the exact same thing expressed in two different ways. They represent a resilient and proud people turning hardship and history into something beautiful that they can raise their voices to together as one people. When the echoes of the Junkanoo drums finally fade and the church hymns come to an end, the people of the Bahamas gather around a different kind of altar. It is an altar of fire and salt and shared plates. At Arawak Cay, which is a vibrant strip of colorful wooden shacks that locals simply call the fish fry, the heavy aroma of hot oil and roasted garlic drifts through the air every single evening as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. The undisputed star of nearly every kitchen stand here is the conch. This is a large and majestic marine snail that must be carefully cracked from its spiral shell before being prepared. It is diced into perfect cubes and tossed with a bright rainbow of fresh tomato and crisp onion and acidic lime juice to create a refreshing conch salad. For those seeking something warmer, the meat is coated in a savory batter and deep fried until it becomes golden conch fritters. A skilled vendor at the fish fry can crack and dice a conch in a matter of seconds. His movements are so practiced and fluid that the process looks less like cooking and more like a rhythmic dance of the hands. It is a muscular memory built over thousands of repetitions, where the knife moves with a precision that requires no conscious thought at all. Alongside the celebrated conch, you will find succulent spiny lobster and the national staple known as peas and rice, which is rice slow-cooked with earthy pigeon peas. There is nothing unnecessarily elaborate about this cuisine. It is simply the bounty of the sea, prepared with enough simplicity to let the natural and briny flavors speak for themselves. On a typical Saturday night, a family cooking dinner together will usually split the labor without a single word needing to be spoken. One person focuses on dicing the onions, while another keeps a watchful eye on the steaming pot of rice. A third family member will taste the broth one last time for seasoning before the meal is finally carried to the table. For a nation surrounded entirely by the vastness of the Atlantic, food is far more than just basic sustenance. It is the physical proof of how well these people have learned to live in harmony alongside the sea. They have mastered the art of turning whatever the ocean gives them into a feast that brings the entire family together. But the people here also know a deeper and darker truth. They know that the sea is not always this generous. The generosity of the sea can vanish in an instant and be replaced by a terrifying and unbridled power. In September of 2019, the once bright and inviting sky over the Abaco Islands turned a heavy and bruised shade of dark gray in a matter of mere hours. This was the arrival of Hurricane Dorian, which remains the strongest storm on record to ever strike the Bahamas. It was a monster of wind and water that nearly erased entire communities across Abaco and Grand Bahama from the face of the earth. The winds held at a catastrophic strength for agonizing hours, while surging seawater swallowed the very streets that people had known their whole lives. In the chaos and the darkness, many families managed to grab only the small treasures and essentials that they could carry in their own hands. For islands that were already defined by their remote charm, the disaster hit with a specialized kind of cruelty. Rescue crews and vital relief supplies took many days to arrive at the shattered shores. The same isolation that once made these islands feel like a special sanctuary had turned overnight into a desperate matter of life and death. The water that usually provided life had become a barrier that kept help at bay. One specific family in Abaco lost nearly every physical possession they owned to the storm, but they chose to rebuild their home from the ground up on the exact same foundation. They worked slowly and painfully by placing board upon board and sheet of tin upon sheet of tin. They did not do this because they had no other options or nowhere else to go. They did it because that specific piece of land was a part of their soul, and it could never be replaced by a safer life anywhere else. The reality of climate change has made monstrous storms like Dorian much less of a rare event for this region. For a low-lying country scattered across the vast and open ocean, every new hurricane season now carries the same heavy and unanswered question regarding whether there will be enough time to prepare when the next shadow appears on the horizon. And yet, just months after the floodwaters finally receded, the air over Abaco was filled once again with the rhythmic sound of saws and hammers. This was not the sound of desperation or giving up. It was the defiant sound of a community deciding to build their lives again in the only place they have ever truly called home. When you witness the sheer determination required to rebuild after a disaster like Dorian, you begin to wonder why so many choose to stay at all. A vast number of Bahamians possess every possible reason to leave these islands for good. They hold prestigious degrees from foreign universities and have extended families already established in the United States, and they can clearly see the chance at a much easier and more predictable life somewhere else. Yet, despite the allure of a simpler path, the vast majority of them choose to stay anyway. Or, If they did leave for a time to seek their fortune or education abroad, they almost inevitably find a mysterious pull that brings them back to these shores. Mania. On many of the quiet and sun-drenched family islands, the land is passed down through countless generations of the same bloodline. In the eyes of a Bahamian, land is never viewed merely as a piece of commercial property to be sold for profit. Instead, it is seen as something spiritual and inseparable from the very core of who they are as a people. An older resident living on the same patch of earth his grandparents once worked can often name nearly every soul who has lived and labored and passed away on that same small yard of sand and soil. To him, the dust beneath his feet is not just earth, but a living record of his own history. Someone who spent many long years living in a distant and cold city abroad describes the profound experience of coming home in one simple and beautiful thought. They say that the specific and heavy smell of the salt air and the distant ghost of the sound of Junkanoo drums, the very moment the plane tires touch the runway, is enough to let your heart know that you are finally home. It is a sensory homecoming that vibrates in the bones and settles in the lungs. It is certainly not that life here is easy or without its constant and heavy struggles. The devastating storms still come with the seasons, and the opportunity for traditional wealth is still much thinner than it is in the constant hustle of Nassau. But there is a sacred something that no other place on this earth can ever truly replace. It is a profound sense of belonging that has been built across long centuries on the exact ground where their ancestors once stood and breathed and fought for their lives. And that truth, in the end, provides the final and most honest answer to the question this film explored from the very beginning. The version of the Bahamas that you see on every shimmering postcard is undeniably real. The water truly is that impossible shade of blue, and the sand really is that blindingly white, and the massive resorts really do cast their golden glow across the dark water every single night. These images are not an illusion, but they represent only the visible edge of a much larger and more complex country. Beyond the neon lights and the infinity pools lies a nation where a solitary mailboat is still the only fragile thread connecting completely different worlds. It is a place where a family will patiently rebuild their lives from the wreckage of a storm simply because they cannot imagine leaving the spirit of that land behind. It is a world where the thunder of Junkanoo drums reminds every citizen once a year that their freedom was once a precious thing worth fighting for and dying for. What ultimately keeps Bahamians rooted to these shores is not a sense of perfection or a life of ease. Instead, it is something much harder to define and far more powerful. It is a mysterious and ancient pull that brings people back again and again to the exact patch of earth where they were born, no matter how many other tempting options the rest of the world might offer. It is a loyalty born of salt and history and the shared rhythm of the tide. So as we leave these islands, we have a final question for you to carry home. If you were forced to leave the very place where you grew up, in search of a better opportunity or a more comfortable life somewhere else, what do you think would be the one thing that would eventually pull you back? What is the invisible thread that connects your heart to the ground where you first learned to walk? If this journey moved you, Please leave a like and subscribe to join us for our next voyage. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we thank you for being a part of this story.